excited to have you here. I already see there's a few people in the chat. If we can just scroll to the public chat, I see Koen, I see Sarah, I see Helmut. Can everyone share where are they calling in from? What cities? I see now Natasha, Jeroen. Welcome. Alexandra, good morning. So we have Switzerland, we have Amsterdam, Hanover, Poland. Welcome. Wechel. Dubai.
All over the world.
Wow. South Korea, France, Lebanon, Dublin, Switzerland, Austria. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
From Spain. Were you expecting such an international turnout today, Hakan?
Yeah. I hoped an international turnout, but great to see all these people from different parts of the world.
We have Dortmund, we have Lille. So we'll wait a couple of minutes for everyone to join. In the meantime, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar. My name is Nihal Bellari. I'm a customer success manager here at Speak Up, and I'll be your host for today. So thanks everyone for being here today. The webinar will be about 40 minutes. There's also going to be a part in the end where you can ask questions. I see more people are coming in. Great. Welcome everyone. Good morning. Today, I'm joined by Hakan Honders, who has an extensive background in compliance and ethics management. Hakan has experience as a confidential advisor, supporting many employees, and also has had previous roles in Speak Up programs and whistleblowing systems. So thanks, Hakan, for joining today. Before we dive in today's topic, can you share a little bit more about your background?
Yes, Nihal, I can, and thank you for having me, and good morning to everybody watching. I have an educational background in psychology, business administration, and social sciences. And during my 20 years career in the compliance and ethics field, I really am fascinated about the psychology behind speaking up and the psychology behind people finding the courage to report things, and also the tipping point before and after people decide to speak up. And I'm really anxious and really looking forward to talk about this topic in more detail with you and together with the audience as well.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd say we begin. So thanks, Hakan, for sharing. I want to guide today's discussion through different themes, such as how do you build trust before and after a report has been filed? What are the roles and responsibilities of some of the stakeholders involved? But I really want to make sure that we also have this discussion about trust, because that is the main theme that will weave through our entire webinar.
Yeah.
I want to begin with the question to the audience. So, what is the biggest challenge your organization faces when creating trust in your organization? Is it fear of retaliation, lack of trust in reporting processes, inadequate communication and training, or perhaps insufficient support from leadership? We'll give a few moments for the answers to come in, but I'm already seeing that fear of retaliation, some individuals have already gone and selected that. Building on this, Hakan, a safe environment is vital for speaking up, but practically, how can an organization do this?
Often employees are reluctant to speak up or report misconduct for all the reasons that we see in the poll. And looking at the answers, I see the main answers is fear of retaliation. Yeah. So what can you do as an organization? I think there are three main building blocks. First, in order to build trust, it's important to encourage proactive and open communication during the process of reporting, which also requires managers and compliance professionals to be approachable and listen actively to what people are speaking up about. And also provide clear guidance on reporting procedures, so managing those expectations thoroughly. When it comes to training, I think it's important also to train managers in how to handle reports adequately. So in a sensitive and confidential matter, whilst also managing expectations correctly. And also to conduct regular workshops on ethical behavior and reporting mechanisms. Because while it may seem obvious for compliance professionals or people from HR, from an employee's perspective, most of the time there's a lot of questions, a lot of dilemmas, a lot of emotions also involved. And also we touch upon the importance of good supporting systems. So establish clear reporting channels, diversified possibilities of reporting wrongdoing, and also ensure confidentiality and protection against retaliation. And in order to do so, it's important to stay in good contact with the reporter or with an employee speaking up, not only before, during, and after the report as well.
So I like that you also touched on this holistic, holistic view of, it's not just when a report comes in that we look into something and then we leave it like that. You want to have that, let's say, human touch, that connection while the report is happening, the investigation is taking place perhaps, but also towards the end while you're closing a case.
Exactly. That's true. Yeah.
And now if we can just summarize, I'm just curious to see the result of the poll. I see that indeed fear of retaliation was the most chosen one from our audience.
Yeah.
Let's talk about handling reports. So how can managers encourage their team to report and get information they need from a reporter while building that trust?
Yeah. Yeah, let me share some of my observations. From a manager's perspective, I think it's about finding the right balance between doing too little, too late, or too much, too soon. Maybe especially when it comes to social safety related matters or workplace misconduct. Usually there is some gray area where you really, as a manager, can enter into a dialogue with an employee and to really discuss also the concerns of an employee regarding, for example, the fear of retaliation, but also really touch upon the emotions and the dilemmas the employee has faced before deciding to actually speak up or report something. And in addition to that, I think it's important for managers to provide guidance, even when the process is unclear or the outcomes of a certain process are still unclear. So in my experience, you can never communicate too little during the process. And employees really value that you stay in good contact with them in the course of the follow-up of a certain report or after they have spoken up. Also, it's important from a manager's perspective to keep your own limitations in mind. So we'll touch upon that a little bit later, but manage expectations and safeguard the integrity and of other employees also involved. And finally, I think it's important that while we may tend to dive into the information that is provided or the report that is filed, more from a content perspective, I think it is also important not to forget and acknowledge the feelings of employees and their dilemmas. And that could also, like I said, include the fear of retaliation, but any other questions or concerns that they might have, not specifically related to the content of their report. Those are some of the things I would like to highlight.
And I just wanted to take a pause there and also see from our audience. So we have another question, which is, what should a manager do if an employee raises a concern but asks not to take any action? And we have a few of these answer categories. It includes respect the employee's wishes and take no action, inform the issues that might require mandatory reporting and explain, consult with HR or a confidential advisor to determine the best course of action, document the concern and monitor the situation discreetly, and finally, encourage employee to speak up with a confidential advisor or use an anonymous reporting system. So we'll let this poll run for a few minutes so people can select some choices. But I see that there's a question from Ruud. In respect to reporting procedures, how do you handle complaints from members of the executive team? To add on it further, Do you land these complaints with an external independent complaint handling organization?
It could certainly be the case, but I think it's also about establishing clear governance procedures as well. So it's also a governance aspect. And I think it could be wise also to work together with an independent complaint handling organization as well. Yeah, and make sure that you have the in-depth knowledge and experience, senior professionals as well, who have dealt with these kinds of cases in the past as well.
Yeah. Of these executive leadership members.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And seeing from the poll, we have a tie between informed that some issues require mandatory reporting and explain, and also encourage employees to speak with a confidential advisor or use an anonymous reporting system. Hakan, what would you say in this situation?
I think the initial response, should be to include or to take into consideration two important responsibilities from a manager's perspective. And it is one, manage expectations. So before giving a floor to an employee to tell you what's going on, also I think it is important to explain the manager's responsibilities and limitations regarding confidentiality. Sometimes, and I see it's not reflected in these answers, but I have engaged and talked to managers in different trainings where they say, in this case, I would respect the employee's wishes and take no action. And that is maybe a little bit too short-sighted, because as a manager, you also have to take into the consideration the interests of the company, but also the interests of other employees and their social safety in some circumstances. So really manage those expectations well, and therefore clearly communicate before you give the floor to an employee that serious issues may and need to be reported for the safety of all employees. And also maybe then suggest alternative options they might have, such as speaking with a confidential advisor or a trusted person. And they may be at a later stage, make an appointment with the manager or with a compliance department, or file reports using their speak-up whistleblower hotlines. In addition to that, I think it's important to create a so-called holding space, which is about listen actively and really acknowledging the employee's concerns. So realize that sometimes there's more at stake for an employee that meets the eye. In my experience, the information shared by employees, it goes step by step, and they are really looking to you as a manager or a compliance department and really try to make a good estimate whether what they are willing and what they are planning to report is in good hands, and whilst also their feelings and their dilemmas are really taken seriously. So those are, I think, the main two important topics I would like to address. So manage expectations and really create a holding space for employees to feel free to share anything they have in their mind and at heart.
And I like what you say about this holding space aspect, because indeed, if someone wants to report, within them, there could be so many things going on, so many feelings. Hey, can I trust the person? Can I actually speak up? And I feel like the way you describe this holding space is really to work together with someone who is reporting something to make them feel comfortable to share more.
Exactly. Totally true.
What would you say are some of the common dilemmas managers face when handling reports? And can you provide an example of how a manager can effectively handle a report?
Yeah, I think it's about the first dilemma, confidentiality versus responsibility. Second is about anonymous reporting, how to deal with anonymous reports, and maintaining trust in general. When we look at the confidentiality versus responsibility dilemma, it's all about balancing the employee's request for confidentiality, or maybe not to take immediate action, but also, again, taking into consideration your responsibility as a manager to follow up on things that you think are serious enough to follow up upon. Second, when it comes to anonymous reporting, I think it's about dealing with anonymous reports and ensuring they are taken as seriously as seriously as reports which are not anonymous, while protecting all the parties involved. So also maybe people who are reported about. And finally, maintaining trust is about ensuring that the reporting process does not damage the trust built with the employees. Yeah.
And did you perhaps have an example of some way we could share with the audience what?
Yeah, a while ago, we received this anonymous report with some severe allegations concerning the behavior of an employee. And in the policy that time, it was stated that anonymous reports were not handled, were not taken into consideration. But looking at the report we received, we thought, that doesn't feel right. We really need to, one way or another, take this report a step further. And finally, we decided to inform the employee about this report. And it turned out there was a totally different perspective when it came to this report, because it turned out that the employee was more or less blackmailed by people she knew privately. And well, she actually needed support and guidance how to deal with that. But she was afraid to speak up about it to her own manager or to her own compliance department because of the fear of reactions of her manager. So yeah, by really taking this anonymous report a step further, it enabled us to really show to the employee we also care about your concern. We are not prejudiced. We just want to know some of the background. Do you recognize this report or not? And it turned out to be the right course of action.
I think the key thing there is that open dialogue with the individual.
Exactly.
We have a question from Denisa. What would you do if employees speak informally to the compliance unit, hinting on an issue with a manager, but are reluctant to report?
Yeah. May I also ask the audience to answer this question?
Okay.
Maybe that's also nice.
So if we can just move to the public view chat, and for the people watching, very curious to see how you would react to that question. Okay, I think we'll come back to this in a moment. But whilst you're thinking at home, how would you respond? We'll come back to this in a minute.
Perfect.
But I'm curious to hear, how can managers or organizations deal with anonymous reports while playing their role in protecting the organization? Because I think this is also an important perspective to be aware of.
Exactly. I think it's important to start with having a clear vision, how to deal and to handle anonymous reports. In my view, I think it depends on the topic of the report and the level of detail about the information that is provided when you receive anonymous reports, what the best course of action is. But I would not advise to exclude it beforehand, because you never know. In general, I think it helps to facilitate secure and anonymous ways to report wrongdoing. And so you can really enter into a dialogue with an anonymous reporter, maybe then step by step inviting the employee or an external party to disclose his or her identity, which might make it easier to prevent any retaliation toward that person. So the use of secure anonymous reporting mechanisms. Also, in doing so, it's important to communicate also about the limitations of anonymous report, so that as an organization, sometimes you cannot follow up on the information because you do not know the identity of a person involved, especially when it comes to social safety related matters, which usually are an aspect of interpersonal relations, where there might be also some misinterpretations of certain behavior, or etc., etc. And I think it's important to follow up on anonymous reports, which as much diligence as named reports. Yeah,
I can imagine. Yeah. So if we go back to Denise's question, I see that we've had a few responses. So Remco says, Start the discussion with the reporter on why the person is reluctant to go straight to the person concerned. Is this
Exactly.
clear?
Yeah. I think a huge work for example, in my work as a confidential advisor, and we will touch upon that at a later stage, is about encouraging people to speak up, but maybe try to identify ways to solve the issues themselves. Of course, not giving them the impression that you cannot or do not want to do anything for them, but finding ways and just take your time to identify other informal ways to solve matters. Also, I think, and then we touch upon the managing expectations topic again. I think it's also important from a compliance perspective or compliance department perspective that you also sometimes say, hey, of course, I understand your need to discuss with me in an informal way, but hey, please be aware that if you're going to tell me things that I feel are important enough to follow up upon, there might be a possibility that I need to do so. Of course, again, maybe finding ways to maintain your confidentiality and not to disclose your identity. But then again, maybe it's also wise to advise this employee on other alternatives, like, for example, a trusted person or a confidential advisor, and then afterwards come back to compliance, or maybe with the help and support of a confidential advisor, enter into a dialogue with the manager. So again, not jumping into actions, but first identify what's at hand, what other alternatives might be possible, and then help an employee to take the best possible steps.
I like that. And Morita very simply said, ask questions. I see that Joost Moritz, that was Moritz from earlier. I see that Joost says that depends if there are more signals regarding the manager. I would review the employment surveys and seek for more signals. And if those are not there, our hands are tied.
Yeah. Exactly. Employment surveys are also a really useful source of information, but also maybe touch base with HR. So I would also take this as a signal as compliance. So sometimes during the course of a year, you maybe receive different signals about a certain manager or a certain department. And maybe these signals independently do not, require immediate action, but there might be some trend or a pattern. And maybe at a certain moment in time, it could be the case that you feel the need as a compliance professional and department as well, that you bring those signals a step further.
I think this also connects with what you were saying earlier, which is not necessarily to go into action mode, but just to understand, have that open dialogue.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we also have Dominique, who says, from her point of view, employees want some action, either mitigation, for example, mitigation measures, but doesn't want to be connected with these and is afraid that their name might be disclosed in the case of reporting. Her view is that best way would be to address this issue just based on the received information.
Yeah. Okay.
So we got a lot of nice insights from Dominic and Remco about their opinion. And one thing that you touched upon was trusted advisors.
Exactly.
I know from our webinar, we've just seen that we have individuals from countries around the world, Dubai, I see on there. So trusted advisors in some companies are an established role, which has existed for many years, whilst in other companies, this could be very new. Yeah. So from your perspective, what does a trusted person, confidential advisor, play in the reporting process?
Yeah. I've been working as a confidential advisor for almost 10 years now. And I think it's really a valuable add-on to establish a speak-up culture. And then a confidential advisor can provide different roles. First is provide a safe space for employees to discuss concerns without the fear of immediate action. So that's one. Second, also to offer guidance and support on whether and how to report certain issues in a formal way, using the formal structure, but also maybe possibilities to solve issues in a more informal way. So, like talking to somebody, expressing your feelings, or discussing that you do not agree how somebody is approaching you. And also they have a role towards the organization. So they can advise on ways to lower the threshold to speak up, or to how to safeguard social safety, or how to build an ethical culture. And also in doing so, liaise and work closely together with other disciplines like HR, compliance. So I think it's important that all these disciplines who are all working towards these topics like ethics, social safety, code of conduct, they find a way to approach it in a more holistic way, and in doing so also stay in close contact with one another, of course respecting each other's roles and responsibilities, but nevertheless finding ways to share observations and share information when it comes to, for example, the culture of an organization.
And it also, I think it ties into what you were saying earlier about a holding space.
Exactly.
Where if a person, for example, requests, hey, I would like to speak to perhaps a third-party individual or someone who's not as connected to the organization, they might feel more comfortable to share things related to what they wish to report on.
Yeah, and those confidential advices can be internal or sometimes external as well, or both. So it depends. Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning that. What would you say is the role a compliance manager plays in building trust towards reporting processes?
I think there's a lot to say when it comes to this question. So let me highlight some do's which I think are sometimes undervalued. Also from a compliance professional perspective. And there are some pitfalls which I have encountered myself as well. I think first is to use a personal approach. And so use a human touch in communication. So recognizing also the emotional effort an employee has put in, and also which has finally brought the employee to this point of speaking up and report something. There's this risk that we sometimes tend to use too jargon that is too technical, or we dive into the content of a report too soon. But as I have learned also as a confidential advisor, personal feelings, they are, you need to start with personal feelings, personal concerns, and then you get to the matter of the topic and the content of the topic. So that's one. And I think also in that sense, empathy plays an important role. So show genuine empathy and understanding towards the feelings of an employee and his or her situation. And that could also include inform an employee about the emotional support, practical support, such as access to counseling services, for example. So keep a broad view. So looking at the person next to the reporter as a professional.
I think it's also interesting what you say about the technical jargon. I remember you shared a story with me personally where you did some research about how individuals would describe the code of conduct. You asked them to suggest metaphors.
Yeah.
And one of the things was, you mentioned that someone told you it was like a Formula One race, that it was a bam, 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 and then done.
Exactly. Yeah. It's important to also listen to the language reporters and employees use while talking to you. And really carefully listen to the language gives you some information on their concerns and where you can really relate to, which make them feel heard and understood from their perspective as an employee.
And I think this is also a moment to ask another question to the audience. Can you please assess the level of confidence you believe employees in your organization have in the way reports are managed? So this is a 0 to 10 question. 0 relates to there's no confidence or trust, and 5 is very confident. 0 to 10, indeed. And I think perhaps like whilst the answers are coming in right now, I think this is also, would you say this is a nice format to suggest in a employee net promoter survey, for example, to see, hey, do people know that, let's say, an anonymous reporting channel exists?
Exactly, but also would somebody who has reported something or has decided to speak up about something, what would he or she advise other people in the organization to do? Would he or she advise them also to speak up or to report? So the net promoter score when it comes to speaking up and reporting also gives you good information about the level of trust people had before reporting, but also after the process of reporting and speaking up. So I think that would be an interesting question for the audience to take with them, and maybe also give that some considerable thought, and maybe integrate it in their way of asking feedback from employees how they experience certain things.
Yeah, and I think that's how you build these speak up programs and cultures within an organization, by getting these feedback signals.
Exactly.
So from the audience, I see that we have a lot around 4, 5, some towards 7. Is this something you see general with individuals or companies you have initial conversations with before you go into discussing how to improve?
Yes, and I'm also I see that also a certain of the respondents say that I'm not sure. So that's also, I think that's an encouragement to include such questions, maybe also in an employee survey, for example, or to ask to people who have reported something. Yeah.
I see a question from Annette. What is the best practice in information sharing? Should the report be shared with all interviewees?
It's quite a broad and difficult question to answer. I think it relates to a report after a formal investigation, Annette. I would say it's not advisable to share a report with all interviewees. I think it's important that interviewees really recognize that their complete and full story has been written down, and that they feel that, well, they have been able to share everything that they wanted to share, but it's something different. And also there are certain privacy aspects that need to be taken into consideration, which limit, I think, the scope of people that you would like to share a report with. Yeah.
And so we had, like, I see some individuals are still answering the poll. How would you say organizations ensure a positive experience for employees who are the object of a report?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's a good question, because the focus until now has been on the perspective of the employee who is reporting something. And I think it's crucial not to forget the perspective and to keep an eye on the position and the feelings and the needs of the person who is object of the report. Also including informal ways or other ways to restore trust instead of starting an investigation. So I think many of the do's and don'ts we have discussed about also are relevant for the person who is object of a report. Yeah.
Wonderful. And I see the poll is finished. I think we've covered a lot of themes in this webinar, and I just want to take a moment to summarize what we have so far. So the first, you say, is when it comes to building trust in a report, to really establish this proactive communication, training, and clear support systems. So it's not necessarily just for employees in the organization, but also the individuals in that Speak Up program who would be handling these reports.
Yeah.
And the next, what I see is when it comes to these handling of reports, that handlers, you spoke about expectation management, really guide employees through the reporting processes with transparency and empathy.
Yeah.
That there's also this follow-up that takes place. And the final thing that I glean, that I draw from your discussion, is that whilst having, for example, an anonymous reporting channel is great, to also see if an organization can provide other channels like this confidential advisor. So whatever needs that a reporter or the organization may have, that there are multiple resources or avenues that this can, let's say, a conversation can be furthered.
Exactly. I think if you would like to summarize it in one question, one word or 2 words. It's about relation management. So relationship management between a manager, compliance department, and an employee speaking up. Maybe a final anecdote from my own experience. A while ago, I had this conversation with an employee who approached me and wanted to discuss certain things. And we had a good first meeting. And during that meeting, he also disclosed some of his some personal information about his hobbies. And it was a hobby which I did not know much about. And we had another appointment a couple of weeks later. And in the meanwhile, I did some research on the internet and I found some information about this hobby. And in the second meeting, I told this employee what I did and what fascinated me, etc., etc. And then, we had this second information and a lot more information was disclosed. And it was only after a couple of months later, the employee provided me with the feedback. And he said, it was because you also showed genuine interest in my personal life and in my hobbies that I thought in the second meeting, here's somebody who also looks at me from a personal perspective and who sees me as a human being next to me being an employee of this company. And that really, I didn't realize that because I just did it and I just was curious. But yeah, it really made him feel heard and valued and respected. So, and he then said, then it gave me the level of trust to even share more information with you about the topic I approached you in the first place. So yeah, it really was a valuable insight for me, and it really relates to the topic we are discussing today.
I'm happy you shared this story because it sounds like in that moment of you bringing up this conversation, this sport, perhaps, that it broke down this barrier that it's a conversation between a case handler and a reporter, but more a conversation between two people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now we're going to transition transition into the Q&As. But before we do, I would like to inform you that we have a feedback form that will be shared. And this is a moment where you can reflect and also share your thoughts and reactions of the webinar. Once you do this, you will receive a recording. So if you wish to revisit Hakan's insights again, that you can do so. But it's also a nice way to understand how can we provide more value to the community of individuals we have on these webinars, for example. So please feel free to start submitting your questions. I already see one from Dominic, and we also look forward to see you in the future webinars. So Dominic asks, should cases of internal misconduct communicated among the employees to show that misconduct will be punished? Is this clear? I can ask perhaps Dominic to rephrase it.
I think it is clear. It's also about how do you use experiences from the past to leverage upon and to maybe share lessons learned. I think, of course, the privacy of all people involved is an important topic in this case. I think that's really something that you should take into consideration. Having said that, I think based on cases within the organization, depending on the number of people working in the organization and how big an organization is, I think there are possibilities to use cases of internal misconduct in your communication or training as well. But also, you only have to look at the news, and every day you will find examples of internal misconduct, which you can use in your internal communication or during training. So I would say if you feel a little bit hesitant about using internal misconduct cases, look at the news. But also, I think there is a way to respect the privacy of parties involved, and nevertheless maybe describe cases in a more or less anonymous way. So not identifying the people that were involved, and nevertheless highlighting some of the lessons learned that you as an organization have learned from it.
I suggest then we go, do we have more questions? They are rolling in as we speak. So we have one from Mario. How do you feel about a financial incentive system for reporting, like in the US?
I would also like to hear the views of the audience as well. So maybe just have a minute or so to look at the answers.
Do you feel like this financial incentive system, have you come across this in your work?
No, not yet. So I would be really reluctant to really use a financial reward system, because I think maybe it could have some negative, how do you say, incentives as well. But yeah.
Joost says that this is not the way for me. So I think...
Yeah, I would probably relate to that answer as well. Yeah.
Okay. We have Marie Teresa. How can a case manager best deal with a supervisor, with a survivor perpetrator reversal, so victim blaming from the perpetrator?
I do not understand the question.
Survivor. Perhaps this is like, oh yeah, maybe Marie, if it's possible to share some more context.
Yeah.
We can again touch on this in a moment. So Yo wanted to follow up on something. So I'd like to follow up on that point. What about cases where the misconduct incident is known widely and staff are likely to have talked about it to one another? So it's an open secret in your organization. How do you demonstrate to staff that proper action has been taken and certain behaviors aren't tolerated without breaching privacy?
Yeah, I would suggest if certain information about an incident is known widely and it's an open secret, it's useless to not talk about it. So because everybody is talking about it already. So I think the best course of action is to put it on the table, but also again clearly stating that there might be some information that you cannot disclose, because you also need to take into consideration the privacy aspects of different parties involved. Nevertheless, you could explain something about the process that you have followed. Maybe also, I have had some experiences also where you ask people involved whether they would like to share some of their own experiences and feelings regarding the handling of a report. But of course, that might be quite sensitive. But nevertheless, if it's always worthwhile to maybe identify whether there is some room for maybe somebody who has reported a certain misconduct, or the person who the misconduct was about, to share some of his or her experiences, or maybe what he or she has learned about it. Because if you do not touch upon those topics, I think it could damage the speak-up culture even more, unfortunately. Yeah,
it's a very interesting perspective. We have... I see Marie has shared more context.
Yeah.
So situations in an investigation where the perpetrator starts acting like they are a victim, survivor of an incident, and blame the initial reporter of damaging their reputation, ruining their career.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. Maybe that's a nice question, because I can touch upon one of my experiences with one of the working for one of the Dutch universities, technical universities, where they also many years ago they decided to install a confidential advisor also for people who were being reported about. So also because they thought they also need to have this support, or may need a listening ear. So I would also suggest organizations to think about that topic as well. So maybe you could also identify one or two confidential advisors where the perpetrators can go to. Also, just to share their stories, share their perspective, and identify informal ways or maybe additional support to deal with a certain report in an adequate way.
So like what I gather from that, it's that balance between, okay, a person has made a report about someone, but also there is a perspective about the person who is the object of a report, something we touched on in our conversation.
Exactly. And we tend maybe sometimes to easily choose sides. And I think the main lesson is not to choose sides too soon, and also provide guidance to not only the reporter, but also the people that is being reported about. Yeah,
I see. Sarah, so at our company, when we receive a report, we collect needed information, perform an investigation if required, and report the findings, recommendations, and advice to management for corrective actions. Not always the advice is followed, and management deviates from the advice based on management decisions. And the desired result of the investigation is not always reached. What should be done in such cases?
Yeah. Yeah, it depends on the question. What is not always? How often? How frequently is it? And also, do you feel as a department, for example, a compliance department, that you are not being taken seriously? So I would try to identify and dig deeper into the root causes why certain recommendations and advice to management are not followed up upon. And maybe also discuss those findings and those insights with HR and with other stakeholders also involved, maybe other departments. So, and I think at a certain stage, you will probably come to this point where you feel it's important to escalate, because it's crucial for trust in the process that, especially after you have done an investigation, especially when you have identified certain recommendation and advices, if employees on the work floor, they don't see anything changing. So I think it's then again the responsibility of the investigator or the department involved and responsible for the follow-up of these reports, that they also really enter into some good discussions and maybe put their fist on the table and to make clear that this is not acceptable, because in the long term this will really damage your speak up culture.
Yeah, I think this is the final question, but I think one thing you shared is it's not, let's say, an investigation doesn't, and let's say recommendations, these recommendations may not just be a short-term fix, but how do you move an organization in a long term to a more ethical conversation?
Exactly.
So the way you describe it is standing up for it, making sure that it is represented in groups such as management.
Exactly.
So thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. First, I'd like to extend my thanks to Hakan for joining us and helping everyone get a clearer understanding of the role of trust in reporting processes and how to achieve it for effective whistleblowing. Thanks to also everyone who attended. We value your feedback today, so please remember to fill out the feedback form as we wish to provide more value to the community that we have here. You'll also receive a recording of the session, so you can revisit Hakan's insights and advice at any time. And for more resources, please check our website for case studies, ebooks, and more resources. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.